Kia ora and welcome back. This is chapter 10, and in this chapter we're looking at the competence of thinking and questioning. Thinking and questioning is dependent on this first part of what we talked about earlier in the last chapter of identity. Identity allows us to then start thinking about the thinking and questioning part of our world as well, and they're very much connected. Understanding our identity gives our thinking and questioning capacity a modus operandi to actually work forward. And human beings, generally speaking, are not very good at being rational, sensible and logical. And I think that applies to most human beings. And if we put a percentage on it, I'm guessing that probably 80 to 90% of our decision making, thinking, processes, etc. tends to be non-rational, passionate thinking. And we often talk about being intuitive in terms of how we react to things and being thoughtful about how we react to things. And so we can take things like our creative thinking mode and talk about the nature of passionate, okay, as being inspired creativity in terms of creatively. And then we can think the thoughtful of actually doing some research to be creative. We can look at abstract thinking. And the intuitive thing to do, the passionate, non-rational thing to do, is to be reflective. The thoughtful thing is to interpretive. We can look at the analytical thinking we do and talk about the intuitive, passionate, non-rational as being the searching for patterns. And our brain does patterns really, really well. It just loves patterns, loves the concepts that sit underneath things. And the rational part of that is being, the thoughtful part is being rational, okay, and through analytics. So we can be rational and we can be non-passionate and we can be passionate. So that's one way of realizing some of the complexity of the thinking that takes place in our heads, just by looking at those three aspects, those three thinking modes. And there are many, many different modes that we use in order to do our thinking. But we can divide those modes into two distinct columns really, and that is our passionate and inspired and non-rational elements in our thinking and our rational, sensible, logical, researched thinking. But we tend to, as human beings, err on the side of the passionate and non-rational, which makes us thoroughly interesting, I have to say. Okay, and that's what makes people entertaining, it makes people interesting. There are other ways of looking at this as well, and we've got this whole sort of notion of thinking and questioning, and one of the ways we can think through this is through this primary, secondary, tertiary, quaternary way of thinking. And Trevor Bond introduced this notion quite some years ago now, and he talked about the primary layer, which identifies the main questions, the primary questions that open up our thinking and start us thinking. Okay, so the primary questions open up that thinking and the resulting learning. Secondary questions can come along and they unpack, okay, those schemas. Okay, and these allow us to go through that unpacking process. And by doing that, we start to make sense and link from our primary sort of space up here, opening up the learning. Sort of our big questions are up here. Then we've got this next lot of questions that actually get us to interrogate and unpack that initial bit of thinking. And to those two tiers, we've added a tertiary and a quaternary layer to Trevor's work. And the tertiary layer are those questions that allow us to research the prompt and the question and to try and actually work through the categories of understanding and analysing and evaluating. Okay, so this is our researching level. We go through, we've got our primary questions, we've got our secondary questions, our tertiary questions, those that assist us in researching the prompts and the questions that we want to actually find out. The quaternary layer questions are the ones that allow us to distill, synthesize and break down into simple understandings all the research that we've done. And so you can go through that sort of approaching, saying this is primary, secondary, tertiary, quaternary layer questions. We can also look through at the different types of questioning there is, and different groups of people around the world have come up with different questioning types. You can ask a practical question, open questions, undermining questions, rich questions, connected questions, charged questions. and Yoram and Adam Lepstein, or Yoram Paz and Adam Lepstein, come up with this notion of fertile open questions. So there's numerous different ways of actually carrying out thinking and questioning. Questioning drives thinking. Our thinking opens up questions that then drives that thinking again. And so there's a very strong correlation between these two notions of thinking and questioning. Socratic questioning is another way of looking at it. Okay, and so each questioning type has a time and a place for the dilemmas we find ourselves in, the research we need to do, the understandings we're trying to actually work out. You know, what type of questioning do we need at different stages of the work that we're doing? We've used a lot of work around Bloom's taxonomy as well, and that's become sort of the dominant taxonomy we've sort of been looking at, and that Bloom talks about remembering, understanding, applying, analysing, evaluating and creating. And then we can sort of tear down that and look at some of the terminology, some of the words we might use with that. You know, if we're looking at remember, we're recognising, recalling, building knowledge, understanding. Then we're sort of talking about interpreting, exemplifying, classifying, summarising, comparing and explaining. And then we can talk about the applying, executing, implementing, harnessing, exposing, creating, sort of some of the terminologies we can use. And we can do the same for analysis, evaluation and creativity. And in the resource, what we've tried to do is put together some rubrics and frameworks that allow us to use words to unpack and develop our questioning. Okay, so the thinking and questioning competency is complex, there's no doubt about it, but we start simple with young people, building their questioning capability. And the rubrics that we've put in this resource, once again, we're encouraging you to print those off, put them up on the walls, because that allows us, as we're going around the classroom, to ask clever, rich, open, fertile, high-order thinking type questions. All right? It allows us to ask kids to remember things, to understand, to apply, to analyse, to evaluate and create. And we want to get them used to all these terminologies. We want them to get used to open questions, being used rich questions. Okay, and so we can ask the class, okay, ask me a rich question about this, or can I ask you a rich question about this? And so thinking and questioning is a huge competence, and it takes many, many years of development over time to build up a rich questioning capability. But in a world of fake news, rich questioning, open questioning, fertile questions, it's really, really important that we interrogate and not just believe people because they seem to be important. We need to interrogate the information we're being exposed to, interrogate the ideas, interrogate the concepts, interrogate the understandings that are coming out, and never just take them for granted just because someone says this is what it is. And we encourage you to do this with this resource here. You must ask the questions. Do not take things bland and go, okay, right, yeah, this must be good. Okay, yes, everyone else is doing it. It must be the right thing to do. We have to be critical thinkers. We have to be able to ask open and rich questions and undermining questions, and it just goes on and on. So questioning and thinking is a brilliant competency. It's a competency that once you have a measure of, you changes the way you think. It changes the way you do research. So we'll leave it there. Chapter 10, Thinking and Questioning. See how you go with that. Read through the chapter, print things off, start leveraging those question skills off the walls around the rooms that we have, and driving those questions with the young people in front of us, our learners, to ensure that they're actually learning and gaining agency of that learning by using rich questions, open questions, fertile questions, connected questions themselves. Okay, I'll leave it with that. Okay, thank you very much, and we'll see you in chapter 11. Okay, cheers.